In this video, we're going to be reassembling our KZ400. We've got all the things, all the parts that we need, so now we can go on ahead and we're going to put new rings in it. We're going to hone the cylinders. We are also going to surface the head, surface all the other pieces in there that have been warped over the 50 years of use of this thing. So let's get to it. So before we get started on anything, we need to understand we're going to be honing the cylinder. So let's talk about the different options you have when you're going to go hone your cylinders. So the first option is the dingle ball hone. And these things are relatively inexpensive. They work extremely well. If you're just going to put new rings in your bike, you get a dingle ball hone. The real problem with one of these is that they are size specific. This particular one's for a very small set of cylinders, and as you go with different sizes, if you're working on bikes, you need the right size. But if you only have one bike, you're going to go deal with it, or a couple bikes, you can get one that'll work on a 250, anywhere from a 200 to a 250, and maybe something of that nature. So different sizes. The next one is the expandable hone. And this guy has a set of stones that articulate, and the whole thing expands out. So it works on a whole variety of different size cylinders, and you can go on ahead and be able to hone most cylinders. This is a very good hone. It does have a tendency to follow any irregularities in the cylinder. So if your cylinder is kind of wavy, this will take out some of the waves, and it does a fairly good job. The ball hone follows every wave in there. It just scratches the cylinder, is basically all that it does. The third option is what we call a burnishing hone. And this particular hone is a really, really good way to straighten up the cylinder. When a cylinder is bored, there's a bit that runs around in there, and as the bar starts getting longer and longer, it has a tendency to deflect. So as it's boring, the top is the size that they measured, and as soon as it starts getting down to the bottom of it, it's deflecting a little bit, and the cylinder actually becomes a little bit smaller. The way that the machine shops deal with that is with a burnishing hone. This hone, the stones do not articulate in any direction. They always stay parallel. The way you adjust it, there's a micrometer adjustment in there, and that micrometer adjustment allows the stones to move in and out. This particular one is an Amco hone, and it's got two different sets of stones. It's got one for the smaller cylinders, and then if you need to go larger, there's some longer stones that you put in there. So there's only the two that go in there. And this thing will go anything from pretty much like a 90 cc's all the way up to, I can do a 450 with it, 450 single. So this is the hone that we're going to use on our KZ400, because this one straightens out the cylinder. If your cylinder is wavy, and this will straighten it out. You can even take one of these, and if you need to take 10,000ths out of a cylinder to do a bore on it, you could use one of these. It does work. It'll take it right out. You'll be there for a long time, but it'll take it right out. You use the hone, it hooks up, you hook up to a drill, and you latch it into this, and then you can work it in and out. So the next thing we'll talk about when it comes to honing is the crosshatch pattern. You've all heard the crosshatch pattern. Well, the crosshatch pattern is there for a reason. It's about 60 degrees when you look at it. And that 60 degrees is what they have determined over years and years and years of people doing this stuff is the best way for that cylinder to hold just enough oil so that everything is still lubricated, and especially at first, the rings need to break in. If you don't have some sort of crosshatch pattern in there, your rings will not break in properly. Or if all the lines went parallel to the cylinder, it wouldn't break in at all, and that would be really bad. If they were completely flat, they would wear out very quickly because that's making grooves in there. The crosshatch pattern keeps it from wearing, holds enough oil, and allows it to break in. That's why they do it. So we'll get down to the honing. What we'll do is we'll clamp our cylinder into the vise, we'll hone it, put in our crosshatch pattern, and we'll go from there. Then we'll go ahead and surface those. Well, that's the next trick. So let's get to honing.
Okay, with our cylinder in the hone, we can go on ahead and start adjusting the hone so it fits perfectly. So we just tighten it up with the micrometer, and it will till we get it just where we want it. Okay, nice and tight. Now we'll take our drill with our attachment on it. You see it articulates. And we'll get it started, and the Fink is supervising. Okay, start to turn it, and you can see we're going to be putting in our 60-degree crosshatch pattern by moving it in and out, and then we'll keep it lubed up with a little WD-40. And continue on with our 60-degree crosshatch pattern. As you can see, you spin it fairly slowly, and we move it in and out at a reasonable speed. Now we can remove the hone, kind of twist it when it comes out so that we don't leave scratches in it. And we'll wipe it clean, little denatured alcohol, clean it up a little bit. And the camera doesn't pick it up, but that cylinder is just really close to being perfect. And we'll give it one more shot, just on the other side. Get it adjusted, a little lubrication. Our drill with our articulating head and 60-degree crosshatch pattern. Now we back it off, and then we can just get the hone out. And we'll give this other side just a little bit more. There were just a few little places in there that just needed a bit more. Right? Came out of the drill. And that's all it's going to need. Take it out. I loosened up the hone enough to where it wouldn't scratch when it came out. Clean it up. See how the cylinders look. And right now what we have are two very, very straight cylinders that are just as fresh as they could be at this point. Now the next thing that's going to have to happen is you need to wash these out with soap and water, because the soap action will pull all the grit out of the cylinder, and you don't want any of that stuff in there. You can see on the towel, it's just not very, very good. And the Fink is taking care of us here. He's making sure we do it right. Okay, now that the cylinder's been honed and everything is in good shape, it's now time to surface it. So we've laid down our piece of 150 onto the bench. It's all ready to go. All we need to do here, and again, the bench is very, very smooth. There's no bumps in it. It's been flat. It's been checked a zillion times. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our cylinder and take a little bit of something to lubricate a little bit, and lay it down on here, and you can see what we're going to do is just move it around and just get all the surfaces flattened out again. And if it becomes too hard, the best thing you can do is, if because the cylinder is big, it's kind of covering almost all the paper, you can go on ahead and tape the paper down. It will make it a little bit easier, but you can do it this way, it's fine. Get it all cleaned up, and once it's clean, see, as you can see, it's already starting to see all the spots where it's been over tightened over the years and heat has done it. But look in here, it hasn't touched it at all, but around the edges it does. So you can see the warpage in the cylinder because of being tightened down. Now the centers of it gets a little bit warmer anyway, so it warps a little bit. So we need to do a little more and just keep on going around until the whole surface is nice and even, the best that we can do. I mean, it takes a bit of work, but look, it hasn't even touched certain parts of it. A little more lubrication, and we'll continue on doing this. And say sometimes it's better just to tape the thing down, and the paper's moving around a little bit, but you keep on working on it, and you can just keep on working this back and forth until the whole cylinder is completely done. And now with the cleanup, we're just almost completely there. And after we do this, we'll do the exact same thing to the head. We'll be taking out the valves. We'll take out the valves, we'll get everything done, but you can see all the little spots are just about gone. One more shot here and it should just about do it. We hope. And as you can see, the difference is day and night. Even though the camera's not picking up real well, I'm getting a better camera, and it will show more detail. But as you can see, we have a really nice looking cylinder here. We make sure that any and all garbage, if there's any kind of sealant or anything, and just make sure all that stuff is off there. But it's beautiful.
So now that we have taken the time to surface all the cylinder head, the cam cover, is now time and just a ton of cleaning to get this cylinder head back to some resemblance of normal. I have been scraping out carbon inside of here, removed broken studs, removed all the valve guide seals, got all the carbon scraped out, been cleaning on it so the appearance of it is nice. I removed all the spacers in here, the locating studs, and surfaced everything, so everything is looking pretty good. What we need to do now, I have done an initial valve lapping, but I need to do the final on it. What I do is I take a coarse lapping compound and just do an initial on it, then take a little bit finer and do some more, And now I'm going to take a 600 grit. It's for lapping in slides on guns, but it's a very, very fine grit, and it gives a very nice surface on the valve. So we'll demonstrate how to lap those valves. The same process is for the coarse, the medium, the fine is just the same thing. There's like one special tool, a little bit of valve grinding compound, which you can get at any auto store. So let's get down to that, and we'll lap these valves in. We'll then put in our valve guide seals and assemble this head. So here we go. So to go on ahead and get these valves ready to lap in, and what I've done here is I've taken them over to the wire wheel and got off all the carbon on both sides. They are smooth, clean, and nice. Okay? So now what we want to do is we're going to lap that in. So we need to get this surface as nice as we can, and the way we do that and make a good seal, the way we do that is we use some lapping compound. There's different ones. Some come in tubes, some come in little tiny tins that you pry open. That's the way that most of them come. This comes in a little jar, and in this case it's a little dried up, so we'll probably have to add a little bit of oil to that. And as a matter of fact, we'll just do that right now. And I'm just going to squirt in just a tiny bit of oil, and I'll mix it in with this. This is a little dry, and you need it to lubricate. And oil is fine. This is what you would use anyway, and that's working fine. Okay, and now we can at least apply it on our valves. Okay, there's a tool that you use to do this job, and these you can buy. I've had these for many years, and you can buy them on Amazon. You can get them pretty much in any auto parts store, and they're made for lapping valves. And basically what it does is just a suction cup, and you can put it on your valve, and you will be spinning it. So we can get down to it. So what we're going to do is, this is the intake valve on number 1, the left-hand cylinder. So you take a bit of your valve lapping compound, and you just put it on the edges here. That's all you have to do. These don't hold on that good if you're not holding on to them. So put the valve in, and I've got it off the edge of the bench here. Then you just take this guy and you hit him like that, and you just start turning it back and forth. Let me wipe off the valve, wipe off this guy so it sticks a little better. And this is all that you do. You start working it back and forth. Now, if the valve seat is in really, really rough shape, you would then go on ahead and just use a coarser compound until it starts getting better. But this is all that you're doing. And sometimes it's a little messy. But then you pull it off, take a towel, and you look at your valve seat. Now with just that, as we can see, I'm going to try and get a good view of it, but you can see where it was black before, but that silver part right there is where we have gone through, and the valve lapping compound has polished that out a little bit. And it is in really, really good shape at this point. We got a nice clean ring all the way around. Then you go to your head, and you clean up that. And let's see if I can get a good view of it here for you. And again, the valve seat is nice and clean all the way around. We got a nice smooth finish. So this is in good shape. We're going to continue on with all the others and get them all done. We'll clean this head up because after the valve lapping, we've got grit in there, and we need to use soap and water to get all that out. So I'll continue on. Okay, so now that we have pretty much won the battle of getting all the silicone and all the junk out of the head, get everything clean, our valves are lapped in. I went to the sink and I used some, actually used a little bit of Dawn for a little foaming action, and I went over it with some Simple Green, and this thing is clean as a whistle. There is zero dirt, grit, anything. All the silicone has been removed, so we are ready to go on ahead and start putting this head back together. So the first thing we need to do in this process is valve guide seals. And I've been waiting for these. Took a little while to get. They're slightly different design than the originals. The originals kind of had instead of this metal reinforcement, it had a little spring around it. These valve guide seals weren't in the worst shape, considering that this bike has been like that, but we're putting new stuff in. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to put just a little teeny drop of oil. Actually, I'm going to use a different oiler here. Well, maybe I'll just get this. And you just want to put a little bit of oil around there so that these guys slide around on there a little easier. That's all we really need. Not for sealing or anything, just so that when you go to put them on, they slide on a little bit easier. And there's nothing more to it than just taking it and pushing them on. Now, this seems like, oh yeah, it's on there. Well, not really. You need to use something like a socket or something that'll go around there. So I'm going to grab a socket. In this case, I'm just going to use a 10 millimeter deep socket, 12 point, and that will help push this guy on the way it needs to. It's about the right size. And it is on there really good. Okay, and we just continue on. Let me use the socket on it. Now these are not under a lot of pressure to move back and forth. They need to fit on there snugly, and they do. And all you do is you just keep on pushing these guys on. So they're on all the way and seated. And next one. Okay. And I'm going to give each one a little bit of a tap, just for laughs. And whenever when I tap on a socket or something like that, especially a good snap-on socket, I use a plastic hammer. I'm not going to beat these things up. I beat up my sockets because tools are meant to last a lifetime, especially when you have good tools. You do want them to last a lifetime. So a little plastic hammer works great. Okay, our valve guide seals are in. So the next thing is to insert the valves. So to do that, which is a real simple operation, just get the head in our right orientation. Now, so this is cylinder number 1, and in this case, we just check our valves. Let's see. So this is number 1. I put a little mark on each of the valves so I know which ones they are. So I take just a little bit of 1040 oil. I've got a little oiler here. That's better than using the big one. And I'm just going to take a little bit of oil and just put it on the valve and rub it in. And I'm going to do it to all these valves. Get a little bit of oil on them. I don't want it dripping off. I just want enough to lubricate the seal when we go through and not cause any problems. So when you go through it, you start with number 1, and we'll start with the intake. And we get a good nice, you can feel that the valve guide seal gave it a good grip. That's really good. Okay, and we'll do the exhaust, which is a smaller valve. Same thing, just gently push it through. Okay, and the intake, number 2, gently push it through, and the exhaust. And we twist and gently push it through. Okay, so now we've got our valves in place. So the next thing we need to do is get ready for the springs. Okay, and again, just a little bit of oil on these surfaces. Got to make sure that we get oil on all the places that we're going to need it. So the first thing is that there are 2 sets of springs that go on here. There's this inner spring and an outer spring. Every spring has got a washer on it, and each of these springs, you can see there might be a little bit of wear on it, and that would be the side that the spring goes on. So just go ahead and put that side up. So here we go. We got all 4 of them. We put a little oil on each one, and we'll just look for the wear side. It has a little bit of wear on it. It's not wear, it's just more of a discoloration. And here's the 4th one. They're all the same. All the springs in the KZ400 are the same. Exhaust, intake, same thing. And then there's a smaller set of washers that go on each of the valves. And that's for the inner springs. And we look for the discolored side. Make sure it's up. It doesn't really matter. That's not a big deal. If you get the sides mixed up, it makes no difference. I'm just being, just the way I am. Okay, so now that we've got those in place, we can start putting on the springs. Now, a lot of times they say, well, go on ahead and make sure the springs are in exactly the same place they were before. It doesn't really make that much difference. So we just put 2 sets of springs on each one. An inner one, we'll do all the inners, and we'll do the outers. Every one of these springs have been cleaned within an inch of its life. I mean, really, really, really clean. I try to do that whenever I do this kind of stuff. So now the next thing is there's some caps that go on here, and the caps again have been cleaned. There's no old ugly oil that was on these things, no nothing. And each of these caps, and I'm just going to give a little drop of oil on the top of each of the springs, just because, I guess. Go on ahead, and I'll wipe all that. Just give it a lap. I'm trying not to make a mess with the oil. We have surfaces that we need to have clean so that we can put sealant on. And again, all these caps are identical, so it doesn't really matter. And it's probably not the best thing to do to put everything on quite yet. The reason for that is we are going to be putting we have to use a tool to get these on. And the tool that we're going to use is a valve spring compressor. Now, these come in many, many forms. There's lockdown ones, but motorcycles are different because the valves don't really protrude from the head all that far. And when you try to use a regular valve spring compressor on it, it wants to hit the edge of this. So these are more motorcycle specific. This is not an expensive one, but basically what you do is we are going to compress the valve spring, and to do that, you put this tool in here, and it touches the bottom of the valve. This holds onto the bottom of the valve, and then you can kind of wind it on and get it secured. And then there's this cup. There's this cup. Let's see if I can get it in the camera so you can see it. There's a cup right here that pushes down on the valve cap. And what that's going to do is allow us to put in the valve keepers. And I'm going to loosen this up a little bit so I have some room. Then I'm going to tighten this one down a little bit to make the adjustment that we need. I didn't do this previously, so here we go. So now we have our valve. I'm trying to make sure I'm in the camera here. I'm going to rotate the camera up just a little bit so you can see as much as possible. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to compress this valve spring, and that's going to open up. There's an opening in here. Let's see if I can get it in there where you can see it. There's an opening in here where we're going to put our valve keepers. And the valve, once we compress this down, we can then push in our valve keepers. And the valve keepers are nothing more than, find one here, than these little guys. And they're just a little half moon looking thing that have got a taper on them. And you put the narrow side down, and once they're in there, when you compress it, they will latch in. They'll latch onto the valve. Let me see if I can do that. Well, there's a little indentation in the valve, and there's a little groove in the valve, and this little guy here latches into that. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to grab a couple of keepers, and then I'm going to push. We're going to rotate this valve spring compressor, and make sure that I'm in the camera here. Let me see if I can get it around so you can see. All right, and I'm going to rotate this down, and what ends up happening is I can see the end of the valve in here, inside there, and it's protruding a little bit. So that's about where we want it. So we take these little keepers, and they can be a little fiddly, and we try to push them in, and that one's snapped into the valve. The other one probably won't, because the valve isn't pushed down far enough. So the keeper's almost there. So all I need to do is keep my finger on it so it doesn't fly away, and compress the valve just a little bit more until the keeper falls into place. And not yet. A little bit more. And there it goes. I felt it snap into place. And then all I have to do now is just loosen this up. And we have a, whoops, thing doesn't stay in very well. We have a spring inserted in here. It is all ready to go. The only thing that you might want to do is whenever you do this, just give them a slight tap to make sure that everything is seated properly. So we have one valve in place, and so we just need to repeat that process on all the rest of them. Here we go. I'm just going to do this one, get another cap on it, and we will go on ahead and make it our compressor in place, and it gets a little fiddly sometimes with these, but it's not too bad. This particular one is not a very good valve spring compressor. It's a kit I got because I had a particular motorcycle that needed a really small size, and this kit had that. So again, it's not the world's most expensive kit. I think this thing was about $30 on the Jungle website, which I have to admit, Amazon makes everything very convenient to buy stuff. Delivered to the door, and away we go. Okay, so I've compressed the spring. I'm going to try and see if I can't. You can see it in there, head of the valve. We'll get another couple of our little keepers. And we'll put this one in. And there's not a lot. The opening in this makes it so you can actually get the keepers in. And I think maybe I've wound this one in enough to. Nope, maybe not. Wiggle it around a little bit. Nope. Almost. Just a little more. And I'll feel it snap in. Maybe. There it is. It snapped in. And now I can release the pressure. And so now back it off this way. Okay, now, again, tap, tap, tap. Everything is seated. And we just continue on with our exhaust. And this Alright, so now, again, with the keepers, push one in. And what I do is I kind of push this thing around a little bit when the keepers go in because it's not perfectly centered. And the spring kind of makes it wobble off, so you can kind of move it around. And if you can move it around enough, it will allow the keeper to go in. And we're just now, there, the keeper just snapped in. Same thing. And we now have all four. Tap, tap, tap. And now we have all four valves in place, done, tapped in, clean. Everything is ready to go with the head, other than getting it one more cleaning before we do any surfacing on that. So our next trick will be getting the rings ready, and then we'll be ready to start assembling things. But there we go. Complete head. So the next thing we need to do is we're going to get ready and put the rings on the piston, get everything all ready to go. But before we do that, we need to make sure that our ring end gap is correct. I've actually gone through this already, but we'll just go through it here so you can see. What you need to do is this ring end gap, you need to put it in the cylinder and then measure it. So what you do is you just take your piston ring, you push it in, and to get it around evenly, you can push it in with a piston, but if your pistons haven't been taken out, just take a pair of calipers or something like that and just go around and push the ring down with that. Just lock the thing into place and push it down, and now you've got a nice even feel on it. The book on a KZ400 calls for 0.2 to 0.4 millimeters, which works out to, in this case, if you look at your feeler gauges, 0.2 is about 8 thousandths, and 0.4 is about 16 thousandths, and the service limit completely worn out is 0.7, and that's way out there. That's like 25,000. So we need to be somewhere between 8 and 16. Well, I've already measured these, and I know that they have consistently come up with 10,000. So, which is 0.254, which is close to being right in the middle. And this is just enough to hold the feeler gauge. It slides in, and I got just enough resistance, and it stays pretty much right there. I'm not really holding it up. I'm just kind of balancing it. So our end gap is 10 thousandths, which is just perfect for this. So the next thing we're going to be doing is replacing the rings on the piston. I've already removed the rings on this one, and I was just making sure that everything fit because the rings are a slightly different style. The rings that come from the factory are the double oil control ring is a double ring in one piece. And as I look at mine, it was broken when it came out. I looked at it and I saw that it looked a little funny. And so when I took it apart, as I started to move the ring around, it just snapped. I mean, before I could even get to the point where it was even thinking about coming out, it snapped. It was just really brittle. The other two rings didn't give me any real problem. They're really not that worn out. I can still see that there's a little bit of a coating on the outside of the ring, and it's still there. So these rings were really not all that bad, but this oil control ring was bad, so it needed to be replaced. The new rings I have are 3-piece. They have two very, very thin rings and a middle spacer that goes in there. And it's a little fiddly to get it in, but it's no real problem. The next thing you want to do is you want to clean out your ring grooves. Now, I have a little file with a broken end on it, and that gives me a sharp edge, and I can get in there and just scrape away, and it cleans it really well, and I have good control, and it's a good feel for me. What they tell you to do in the book is to break one of your rings and just use it as a scraper, and that works quite well. I've done that for years and years. It's just that I like the little file a little bit better. I can make sure that I do everything very, very carefully, make sure that if there's anything in there, I can work it, make sure everything is clean, and it gives me a little bit more control. So then you've got the rings themselves. Now, the top ring has got a little bit of a coating on it that you can see. It's silver in comparison to the black coating. The black coating is for the middle ring. The rings themselves have got a little number or something stamped on them if there's an upside or a downside. And in this particular case, we look, and there's nothing stamped into these rings. So this ring could go either way. But this ring does have a little N stamped on it. And that means that this part goes up. And the reason is because the way the ring is made, there's a little lip inside here that you really can't see, but that lip needs to go down. So this ring needs to go on with the N, a little marking, up. So to get the rings on, there's a couple ways to do this. You can do it with your hands, but you need to be very, very careful. So we're just going to open it up a little bit, and we'll get the ring to go into its groove. And there it is. It just went right into its groove without any issues whatsoever. It turns around nicely. It's in good shape. Now we're going to there's going to be a placement for all these rings that we do. Now I looked in the book, and I could not find anything in the book about telling where the placement was. So what I will do, though, is, and again, I'm just going to make sure that there's no markings on this ring. And I see nothing whatsoever. Anyway, and it doesn't have any kind of little lip on the inside, so it just works that way. So again, this is nothing more than taking the ring and spreading it out a little bit and getting it in the groove. And that's all there is to it. It's really not that hard. Now, I'm going to go on ahead and remove these rings are the stock ones, so we'll remove these. And they're just a little hard to get at. Move around a little bit. Hard to get out with the studs sticking out. And they're coming out. It just, what happens is also rings as they get old and they're used, they're a little bit more brittle because they've been heated and cooled, and they become brittle. There's no doubt about it. So these can be a little hard to get out. So I'm going to work at that a little bit. I just have to kind of just work it. And they will come out eventually. Get your hands in there. This one's not making it easy. Usually you use your fingernails on it a little bit. But there it comes. Right, so the ring comes out, and there's one. And we'll get the second one. And I doubt if I'll be able to even get the oil ring out without breaking it. So if you're not replacing your rings, do not remove that oil ring, the stock oil ring on your KZ400. It is brittle, and like I say, if you're not replacing it, leave it in place, clean it the best that you can, but don't take it out because it could break on you, and then you are putting new rings in it. So let's see if I can get this out without breaking it this time. Boy, I made it this time. So that one came out, and what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to take my little, it's got a broken end on it that you can't really see, but I just take it and I just make sure that there's the carbon in there, and these are fairly clean. I've cleaned them up fairly well. I used Easy Off, and boy, that just gets all that carbon out. I did not scrub on these pistons whatsoever, and all the carbon is just gone. So here, I'm going to take the blow out in this, and we'll take our new rings and cut the box open. Now these are a little bit different, and most rings are like this. They're in the oil rings. The oil control rings are in 3 pieces. Oil control rings do 2 purposes. They not only do they control the oil and wipe off oil, but they also put oil back on the cylinder. And there's holes inside the ring groove that allows it to get oil in and out. So if it's wiping off oil, it has a place to go down the bottom. But if there is no oil, and let's say the piston's going down, and it needs to, and there's heat and pressure pushing down on it. There's pressure in the crankcase, and it pushes a little bit of oil vapor back out, which is good. It just distributes oil and keeps the cylinders under control. So what I like to do with this type of ring is, first things first, is I put in this control ring, and it kind of goes in and snaps together a little bit. There's a little red and blue thing inside, and it snaps in. Then there's these little teeny tiny super thin rings, and those rings, one goes on top of that spacer and one goes on the bottom. So we'll go on ahead and get this one in. These rings they're a little strange. They're very flexible, which is nice. They don't break. It's really hard to break one of these, but they can be a little fiddly to put in. Now, the one thing that you want to do when you put these in is we're going to be clocking all these rings. So this ring on the bottom is in. And we're just moving around a little bit, make sure it's all in good shape. And we'll do the same thing with the upper one. And again, these guys just go on each side of that spacer, that little kind of wavy spacer that goes in there, and that's the way most rings work. Oops. And it's just, I'm not there. And again, these can be a little fiddly. Okay, and we'll just get that in the groove and start working our way around. And it's in the groove. Okay, so the one thing we do want to do is I want to clock these rings, and I'm going to put the end gap at about 5 o'clock. And for the bottom ring, I'm going to put that one at about 7 o'clock, just so they aren't lined up. That's really what we're trying to accomplish here. And we just roll it around until it gets to about 7 o'clock. Okay, and these rings are in place, and they have quite a bit of pressure against them, but they're in good shape. Then, again, we have our middle ring. We have our middle ring, and it has the end going to the top. So we'll just very carefully put that one in. We just spread it out. And gently get it into its own groove. And it's in. And the top ring, which doesn't matter because there's no markings on them whatsoever. When there's no markings, they can go in either way. And that's in. So our rings are now in place. So what we want to do is we want to clock our rings. And to do that, it's relatively simple. I like to take the top ring and put it to about 10 o'clock. The opening at 10 o'clock. So if this is 12 o'clock, we put it here. And then the second ring, I want that at about 2 o'clock. And then I want our oil rings to line up at, the other ones are at 5 and 7. So we'll do that. I can find them. Got to get it to rotate around to where we want it. And okay, and this one here, we need to move it around to about 7 o'clock. And we'll rotate this guy around to about 5 o'clock. And so now all of our rings are basically in place. Everybody's happy. And everybody is clocked to where they need to be. And so the next thing we're going to end up doing, once the rings are in place, now our cylinder is all ready to go, our head is ready to go, and we will begin assembly of all of this. Make sure that we have all our rubber pieces. There's some O-rings that go in here. We have we're going to make sure we're going to be using sealant on our base gasket, but there's a special procedure for doing that. And getting the rings on usually requires a ring compressor. I have a ring compressor, but I don't think I'm going to use it. I think what we're going to do is, most people don't have that set of ring compressors. There's a bevel here, and that bevel will help us put our cylinder on. We'll use a plastic tool to push the rings into place, but we will get that we'll go through that procedure. If that doesn't work for us, we will use a compressor, but I don't think we're going to need one.
So the first thing we need to do is get all the gasket surfaces clean, so when we put on the sealant, everything will stick extremely well, and we won't have any leaks coming through from stuff that doesn't stick. Then we're going to be using Yamabond number 4. This is an extremely good sealant. It is designed just for motorcycle engines. It's high heat. It works extremely well. We'll get the cylinder all cleaned up, get it ready to go before we start putting the sealant on the gasket. And we'll be putting a coat of sealant on the gasket so that we can put it down and let it dry a little bit, and it will become kind of like an O-ring. We can go on ahead and put on our, we've got some rubber O-rings in there that we need to make sure to go in so we don't forget them, so let's get them in. And we'll put some sealant on this, and like I said, what we'll do is we're going to put a coat of sealant on it, and it will allow us to, it'll dry, we'll allow it to dry a little bit, which will kind of make it like an O-ring. So what we'll do is we'll put the cylinder down on it, it'll squish it flat, and once it does that, we won't be putting any pressure on it for it to squeeze out, just enough to flatten it out. And when it dries a little bit, then on the final torque, it'll be kind of like an O-ring. It'll just kind of hang in there and not squish out, and it will work extremely well. This is a really good method. I've done it quite a few times, and now that I've got everything all completely covered, we'll put this gasket down, and we need to get the pistons and stuff out of the way as we go through. We don't want this stuff all over everything. It can be messy. We get that all down in there and press it down, make sure our O-ring's in place, a little bit of sealant on those O-rings just to make sure they seal up real well. And we're going to be using plastic devices to push in the rings. These are really good ones, and they got a nice sharp edge on them. We can go on ahead and it'll help us push the rings in, because what we're going to do is we're going to put the cylinder on there, we'll get the piston started, and there's a camphor inside the cylinder. Now we'll get a little bit of oil on these first because we don't want to put anything together dry, but there's a camphor on the cylinder, and the rings will kind of start to go in there, and all we need to do is continue pushing them in, and the cylinder will eventually drop down in. So very carefully, we are going to go on ahead and drop our cylinder on, and we need to make sure that the cam chain guides are out of the way, and then we will get the pistons kind of lined up right in underneath. Just we have to be very gentle. We're not here to break anything, so it can be a little fiddly, but just go on ahead and we'll get them in there, and it's going to drop on in. And here we go. It's like I say, we just have to be kind of gentle, and they will finally start to line up. So now we've got them basically lined up, and what ends up happening here is the rings are basically starting to push into that camphor. The camphor is fairly large, so we can go on ahead and start pushing the rings in. So you just got to kind of look at it, work it back and forth a little bit, make sure our cam chain and everything is out of the way, and we will start pushing the rings in so that it will the cylinder will start to drop on, and you need to wiggle things around. So just go on ahead and look around and see if you can see where any of the rings are sitting out, and just push them in gently, and you're going to work at it a little bit. It's not too hard, you just got to work at it. We'll speed this up a little bit so you can get my head out of the way. But as we see, we just go in and we continue on, and finally the rings will drop in, and we can go on ahead and drop the cylinder on. Now if you got to make sure that that everything is out of the way. So I fished the chain out and got it ready to go, and now our cylinder can push on. and we drop it down. So what's happening here is once this cylinder is dropped down, we'll tap it down a little bit. And once it's tapped down, it's going to push against the sealant. And the sealant will get flattened out and pushed into the grooves. And once it's flattened out and pushed into the grooves, it's really not being forced out yet. It's just flat. We're just smoothing it out more than anything. Okay? And now we'll go on ahead and get all our new gasket surfaces clean, because we're going to be putting on the head gasket. And all of that needs to be just as clean as a whistle. It's really important that the head gasket is clean, because we're not going to be using any sealant on it. The head gasket itself has got some silicone on it for the center section, and we just need to make sure that everything is just as spotless as we can make it. And now we've surfaced this, and we've surfaced the head, so we're giving ourselves a good head start. And we'll just get a little oil in the cylinders because everything is dry at the moment. We did put a little oil in, but it doesn't hurt to have a little more. Okay, head gasket, and now I say it's got a silicone center section in it, and it goes on only the one way. And there's a couple little strange O-rings that go into the holes that I just pointed out. And these little O-rings are, we just got a little bit of sealer on them just to hold them in place. And they're strange. They're kind of oval shaped, and the holes don't line up exactly. In the head, so they offset it. And why they did that, I don't know. So we're ready to go. We're ready to start putting on the head. The head is all cleaned up. It is ready to be dropped on, and we will make sure, well, we'll give it another cleaning. Quick wipe off, and then now we're ready to go on ahead and set it on. And we just be gentle, make sure we don't do anything, make sure of course we're pointed in the right direction, and we will gently put it on. There are some dowel pins that it needs to go over, and it will push on very nicely, and there it goes. And again, the base gasket is being flattened out a little bit. It is not being squished out, so we'll just tap this thing down, make sure everything is seated nicely. We need to have it down as far as it can go in close to its proper position, so when we start to put in the cam, it'll be ready to go. So the first thing we need to do here is get this engine lined up so that we're on top dead center. There's some marks on this advancer, and there's an F and a T, and there's a little mark with a T on it, and we need to line that up with there's a little engagement line, Then what this really is doing is we need to rotate the engine to a certain degree so we can get the chain on. You can see this little divot in the sprocket, and we also need to make sure that the cam is facing upward. So what's going to happen here is we are going to rotate this engine back exactly 90 degrees, which will rotate the cam back 45 degrees and line up with the mark. So first thing we need to do is find out exactly where we are. So we'll get our wrench on there and be able to get this thing lined up again so we can line up with the other mark. So now we're going to get this wrench in to a certain point. You see where it's at, kind of, and then we're going to rotate it back 90 degrees, and there's a little bent over tab on the advancer, and we will line up the very, very edge of that. And as you saw, when it rotated back, you can see that edge right there. See, right there, it just lines up with the alignment mark. Now what we're ready to do is put in the cam, and we can now put it in. We go underneath the chain and make sure our cam notch is facing up, and we'll put it in, and there's an alignment mark. There's two alignment marks on this. There's one that says T, and the other one says, and there's also, yeah, well, this indentation allows the cam chain to drop, the sprocket to drop down, and we can then index the cam chain onto it. Then we can look at our alignment marks, and there's one alignment mark with no marking on it, and there's an alignment mark with a T on it. That's going to be our final alignment. But this one here aligns the chain with the top of the, so we can align this sprocket with the top of the engine. And once we do that, because we've rotated it back 90 degrees, the chain will line up. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the cam in, and then we'll align the chain so that this mark is sitting even with the top of the casting. And once we do that, then once the chain is aligned, and what we making sure that our that little notch is up, we'll put in a cam, and they say to do it from the right side, so you fiddle around a little bit. And let me get that piece of wire out of there holding the chain up. Now we'll just fiddle around a little bit, and we can then put the chain on the sprocket, get the cam in place, and once it's in place, we can then check the alignment mark. So we now lift up, the chain is on, and we lift up the cam chain and put it on the cam, and we look at that alignment mark. And when we look at it, we're off a little bit. So we'll pull it back off, we'll move it down a tooth. Sorry about my arm being away. And then we'll look at it again and get it so that it's aligned with the top of the casting. And so there's a little mark right in there. And my finger it's hard to see, but we'll go on ahead. We're still a tooth off, so we'll move the chain one more time, and we'll bring it up so it's aligned. And all I'm doing is I'm just kind of wiggling the crank around so that make sure the chain isn't bound up. We put it in. We'll take a look at it and make sure it's lined up. And we can see that everything is pretty close. And it looks like we need to, yeah. Now that everything is lined up, and then all we're going to do here is rotate the cam back a little bit so that the holes line up, and we can put a bolt in it. And we're going to take a little bit of blue Loctite on this because that's what they tell you to do. So we'll grab a little Loctite. And what's been happening here is that little lone mark is aligned with the top of the casting, and the notch in the cam is on the upside. And we've rotated it back a little bit so we can get everything aligned. We'll put a bolt in it, snug it down. Won't tighten it just yet until we're sure that everything is right. But we'll just get it sunk down. Got some Loctite on it. Now we'll rotate things around so that we can get the other bolt in. And that should be enough. And we'll get the bolt in. It's got some Loctite on it. Snug it down. I'm just using a small little ratchet on there with not a lot of leverage. Tight. Okay. Now what we're going to do is rotate the engine to top dead center so that we can check our alignment. And we'll rotate and we get that T mark lined up, and where we're at right there, and you can see our little notch in the cam is facing up, and the T mark, if we look in here, it's a little hard to see because it's not focusing real well, but the T mark on the sprocket is lined up perfectly. So now we're just going to take and tighten up our cam because everything is correct. And now it's all correct. Make sure that's tight. And we are timed. So now what we need to do is get some assembly lube on all the cam lobes and all the surfaces, because it's pretty dry at this point. And just make sure you put a good amount on it. And we don't want too much where it's gooping out on any kind of gasket surface, but we do want it to be on everything it needs to be on, so that when we start this thing up, it's got lube on it. And we'll give it a turn. Now I'm just turning this with my fingers and I wrench straight out, so the engine turns over very smoothly and nice. And again, a little more assembly lube on the other side. Make sure we've hit everything. Rub it in a little bit. Just make sure we're in good shape. There's nothing wrong with checking things out. And we'll rotate the engine a little more. And this thing is in great shape. So we are ready to start preparing the cam cover. The cam cover is now, we're going to use Honda Bond HT. It's a high temperature sealant that works really, really well for this. It's very, very thick. So when we put this into that groove on the cam cover, it will fill it. And what we're going to do is just fill it up just enough to where it just sticks out a bit. We'll grab, it's thick, and just start forcing it in. Now we won't bore you with the whole thing, but we're going to go in and just start filling all of that groove all the way around, and just fill it up to where it's just slightly proud of the groove. And we'll sit down and just start putting this stuff in. And I'm going to be very, very careful about not going in and getting it so if it does squeeze out a little bit, it's not going to go into the engine. I'll actually camfer back things a little bit. So now that we've got it all filled up, everything is nice, I'm putting just a little bit around. There's a rubber seal that goes on the end of the cam. We want to make sure that those are sealed up, and you want to make sure there's extra sealant around the edges of all of that. So I'm putting a little bit more around where that rubber seal goes, and again right where the castings meet, make sure there's just a little bit of extra in there. Anytime that you put sealant on anything and there's where cases meet, put a little extra sealant in it. Get the other side done. So now that cam cover is completely filled the groove all the way around with this Honda Bond, and that's again good stuff. It's pretty much the same as Yamaha Bond, just thicker. And now we've got these little cam covers that are going in, and I'm just putting a little, get the O-rings in, and I'm putting a little bit of sealant on those O-rings. They are unobtainium, and they're flat. They're not just regular O-rings. So I want to make sure that they seal up pretty well. They're not in bad shape. They're very flexible and they're in good shape. I just want to make sure that they're okay. And hopefully nobody's going to be doing this for the rest of the, maybe another 50 years I'll be doing it, and then they'll cuss at me for doing that, but that's okay. Now we'll put on the cam cover. Being very gentle, making sure that there's no extra stuff on the inside, so just wipe it off with your finger. Just make sure there's no extra. We don't want this stuff squeezing out in the engine. And what we do want it to do a little bit is we've got this in there, and now what we're going to do is we're just going to set it on and do everything finger tight without any major squeezing. And then once that's done, we can go on ahead and let it dry for about an hour, maybe 2. And once that's dry, it will again act kind of like an O-ring and allow us to, once we do our final torque, we can we'll get all the bolts in, we'll get them finger tight, we'll get them tightened down enough, and we'll start just running these down just a little bit, just to where everything comes together. We're not going to get crazy here. I've got a little tiny ratchet, and I'm just going to run these down so we're just touching and flattening out all of the sealant. Again, we're not trying to squeeze it out. That's not the point here. Not at all. You know, we're going to run this down till everything starts to flatten out. And what you're seeing here is there's just a little bit of spring pressure from the valves, and so we need to just run that down a little bit. We can't just do it completely finger tight, and I'm just barely bringing these down. Almost no pressure at all. We'll just run them down until they're just snug. And we'll continue on with that until everything is snug down. And then what we're going to do is we'll let this sit for an hour or 2 and come back, and we'll do a final torque on it. And once that's done, we can finish up the top end of this thing. And we'll just gently snug things down, just being very, very careful, not overdoing it, not too much of anything. And again, I've just got nothing more than finger tight on this socket. And we'll wipe off any excess that is sitting out there. May as well.
Okay, so it's been about an hour since we've gone ahead and put all our sealant in, got it all in there. Everything has been drying for about an hour. It's now time to torque down the head. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up our torque wrench to 11 foot-pounds. These are going to be 22 foot-pounds, all of these. There's 10 of them all together, 4 here, and then these 2 guys on the end. But they're all 8mm. They're all spec'd to 22 foot-pounds, but we'll start with 11, and then we'll do half of it, and then we'll do the other half. So starting at number 1, and number 1 is right here. So this is where they want you to start, and we'll go to 11 foot-pounds. 8, 9, 10, 11. Number 2. 9, 10, and 11. Number 3. And they're marked on the head. 9, 10, 11. And this torque wrench kind of buzzes at you when you hit your torque. Okay, there's number 4, number 5. Number 6. Number 7. And these are 13mm heads. Number 8. Okay. And number 8. And these other 2 are 12mm. Fiddle around with that. We'll get these 2 guys on. And same thing. 11 foot-pounds. And do the same thing here. And 11 foot-pounds. All right, now back to this and get some goop on the hands. Okay, so starting with number 1, and oops, I need to go to 22, and we set it to 22, if you can see that, and we'll hit it from here. Okay. $20 and 22. Number 2. And number 3. And number 4. And 5. And 6. And 7. And 8. And let's get these other 2 done. And this one. Okay, and I'm just going to run back over them one more time just to make sure that everybody is torqued on the way they should be. And starting with number 1. And 3. Okay, and back to these guys one more time. Okay, so the head is torqued on. We are in really, really good shape. The top end is basically done. We have to put the cam chain tensioner in there, but we'll get that done real quick. I just need to clean up a couple bolts for it, and I'll be back. Okay, so now we're ready to go on ahead and put the cam chain tensioner in. I have surfaced this off because it was extremely warped, and there is not really supposed to be an up or down on it, but there is a 2 stamped in here, so we'll make sure the 2 is right side up. And again, we're just going to use nothing more than a little bit of our Yamabond number 4, and we're just going to kind of do both sides of the gasket like we did the base gasket. Just make sure it's got a nice coating on it of something that's usable, and that's on there. Wipe off my fingers, and we'll make sure that's right side up. We'll take a couple of bolts and we'll put them in. I'm probably going to replace these bolts with something that look a little bit better. These didn't clean up as nicely as I thought they would, but that's all right for right now. Just temporary. And there's a couple of bolts in the head that we are going to have to put in. There's some 6mm bolts here, and we will get those in and torque down. You need to do the 8mm first. And there's those two. Very simple, nothing to it. And the next thing we'll be doing is and this is a simple operation here. There is a spring and a tensioner right here, and all that we do is we'll put all this together. So you have a spring and a tensioner. Make sure you can see that. Okay, and that starts just to screwed into this. And what you do is this engine basically turns backwards, but in this case, to get as much slack into the chain as we can, we just roll it forward a little bit, and then what we'll do is we'll tighten this down until it becomes flush. And I'll get a wrench for that. Make life a little easier. And we'll just wind this cookie in. And the idea here is, once we get this wound in, get this backed off a little more, we will see that it's basically level. And we just back it off till it's just level, because that's the right amount of tension. But what we want to do is we want to turn the engine over a little bit and make sure that that is the one spot that we need to be at. So I look here and I can see it just drops a little bit below. So I'll just take it and tighten it up just a shade. Oh, okay, which is in pretty good shape. And that's it. We're done. So all we need to do is tighten that up with our 17mm here. We're adjusted. It's level. It's all good to go. And we have our cleaned up cover. And this goes on. And again, with the same 17, we can go on ahead, tighten it up. Okay. And it is set up for 87 inch-pounds. Let's back it up a little bit. Make sure it's okay. 87 inch-pounds. This is okay. Yep. And 87 inch-pounds. That's all what needed there. So the top end is together, completely done. The only thing that needs to be done now is our next step is we're going to leave this off, and the reason we do that, it makes it easier to get into the frame. And then, but all the rest of this is all torqued down. Everything is sealed up. Everything is done. We have a top end. So our engine is basically together. The top end's assembled. Everything turns smoothly, and we're good to go. So until the next video, when we go on ahead and put this engine in the frame, we are there. Okay, our top end is complete. We have cleaned everything. We have done all the things we needed to do to get the top end in. We will, in our next video, we are going to be putting the engine in the frame, so it's a nice platform to work on. And number two, then we'll go on ahead and we'll be setting the timing, the points, getting that all set. We're going to adjust the valves, do all the things that we need for your basic tune-up on the engine. We've got a little more work we can do on the carburetors. I got some more parts, so we'll be doing some of that. But right now, we're done with the top end. So hope you enjoyed watching it. I know it's a little long, but I try to go in detail so that you can see everything that has to happen, especially on the cam timing and whatnot. So this engine is ready to go back in the frame. So see you next time. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.